Hey friends and fellow bibliophiles, it's Kat of Kat's Novel Adventures. In today's video, I want to share with you 23 books I want to read in 2023. Holbrook Jackson, who was a British journalist, writer, and editor, has a terrific quote that pretty much sums up how I'm feeling about the stacks of unread books I have throughout my house. He says, "Never put off till tomorrow the book you can read today." That gave me the idea that I need to look at some of the books that I didn't get to in 2022 and make a list and carry over 23 of them in 2023. So that's exactly what I did. I divided the books into fiction and nonfiction, and I'm going to share the fiction books with you first. I even divided those up into subgenres. Now keep in mind, I am not going to be reading these books in any particular order. I'm just going to read them whenever I feel like throughout the year. The first book is I Capture the Castle by Dodie Smith. I was supposed to read this in December for the FOMO book club. This was their first selection for November and December, and I just could not get to it. I was pretty involved with the Christmas Evil readathon. I was reading a mystery for the Cloak and Dagger readathon, and I was also trying to finish my friend Melissa's book challenge. Probably around the summertime is where I envision probably reading it. It is romantic fiction, which is not my favorite, but it does sound like a good time. I actually did attend the meeting that the ladies had for the book club, and it was really enjoyable, and I like this group of ladies, so I want to go ahead and read it just because I bought the book and it sounded really good when they were discussing it. It also has humor in it. The next book is a book that I discovered on Instagram on Reese Witherspoon's page, and I happened to pick this book up when I was visiting my niece in May in Atlanta. We went to Barnes & Noble so I could buy her some books. She had graduated from high school, and the book is The Dictionary of Lost Words by Pip Williams. I've never read anything by Pip Williams. This is a historical fiction novel, and it takes place around the height of the women's suffrage movement, but it sounds really great. It has to do about words. It has conflict between men and women. I have two books in the thriller category, and the first one is a book by an author who my friend Kelsi over at Slime and Slashers actually adores, and I think it's become her new favorite author. At least she says it's her new favorite author, and it does seem like a really great book. I wanted to read it in July when she was doing like a little readathon having to do with coming of age stories, and I just could not fit it in. We did a whole year of King in 2022, and the book we had chosen for July was it. So there was no way between that and other books that I had planned to read that I could get to it. It's really funny because this book, when you look it up, it says that it's horror, thriller, mystery, some fantasy, but she says that it pretty much is more of like I guess a mystery coming of age with some fantasy elements. Anyway, it's called Boy's Life by Robert McCammon. And this is a chunker, so that's why you can see there was no way I could read this as well as it. I don't know how she did both of them, but I am not the fastest reader anymore, so I could not tackle it. But it really does look like a great book. I've heard lots of wonderful things, not just from Kelsi, but other people in the booktube community. The next thriller is Ashton Hall by Lauren Belfer. This is mystery, thriller, historical fiction with gothic vibes. This is another book that I think it's kind of hard for them to put in just one category. I won this book in a Goodreads giveaway. And so I planned on trying to read it when I got the book, but I just could not fit it in and everything that I had going on at the time. The next book was recommended to me by my friend Melissa Morrison, and I believe Kelsi told me that it's a pretty good book as well. It's called The Midnight Library by Matt Haig. It also has science fiction elements to it, and philosophical fiction was something else that I saw about it. I definitely want to read this. I have heard a lot of great things about it. The next book is an advanced copy that was sent to me by Daniel. He writes under DAL. He wrote the book Rise of the Princess, and he sent it to me in December, a couple of days before publication date, or I did not receive it until a couple of days before the publication date. And I was not able to get to it because, like I said, December was a busy reading month for me. I'm thinking about trying to squeeze this in on my February TBR. Even though it's a fantasy, I'm sure it has some fairy tale tropes to it, and I think that would be delightful to read this type of a book for Folklore February. I have another middle grade fantasy book on my list, and that is Indigo by Alice Hoffman. I was supposed to read this book, I believe, in November for Kelsi's nostalgic November readathon, but I discovered that this is the second in the Water Tale series, so I really need to read Aquamarine before I read this one. The next fantasy book is a YA book, and that is Akata Witch by Nettie Okorafor. I discovered her from Gretchen Rubin a couple of years ago, and actually wanted to read this book during the spooky season because, of course, it's about a witch, but didn't get a chance to do that, you know, during October. But I've read Nettie Okorafor's memoir and just fell in love with her story and decided that I'd like to read more of her stuff. Well, this will be the first one that I read, but I'd like to read this one and possibly read the rest in this series. But it sounds really good, it has a lot of witchy vibes, it's high fantasy. The next book on my list is In Every Generation by Kendar Blake. I can thank Elizabeth Sagewood for having me pick this YA book up. It also has vampires in it, which I do like vampires. Not as much as zombies, but I do enjoy them as well. And I'm also a Buffy fan. I love Buffy the Vampire Slayer. But I remember Elizabeth mentioning this book either in a video or on Instagram. And this was another book I happened to pick up at the bookstore when I was with my niece. The last one in my fantasy category is Fairy Tale by Stephen King. This is dark fantasy. It has paranormal vibes, some fairy tale elements, and I am actually reading this, or going to try to read this one in February for Folklore February. It is a chunker. I really am hoping I can get to it then. If not, it probably will carry over into March, perhaps. The next group of books all fall in the horror category. And actually I have 8 of them. I think it's my largest group of fiction so far. And the first one is a middle grade book, and it's by K.R. Alexander, and it's called Vacancy. Check out that cover. Creepy cover. I've read several books by K.R. Alexander, and they're enjoyable. They're not like super scary, but some of them are quite creepy. This next book is a book I've been wanting to read for quite a while. Kelsi recommended it to me. She said it's probably one of the scariest books she's read. It really kind of creeped her out. And I had wanted it for the Christmas Evil Readathon because it takes place in the winter and it has a monster in it. Well, I always get my son Andrew to order my books off Amazon for me, and I thought he had ordered it and he didn't, so I didn't get it in time. But that book is Stolen Tongues by Felix Blackwell, and I heard it's super creepy. This next book was actually gifted to me by Kelsi, and I had wanted to get to it during the slasher readathon that she was doing, I believe in June, and I couldn't fit it in. And that is My Heart is a Chainsaw, and this is by Stephen Graham Jones. I have not read anything by Stephen Graham Jones yet. I do have another book that I picked up at a library book sale called Mongrels. This one I think is going to be a good time. Yeah, I think if you like slasher films, this probably would be right up your alley. So I can't wait to read this one for sure. My next selection was actually one I wanted to read in the fall, especially like during the spooky season. The Last House on Needless Street. I've heard lots of good things about it. It's by Katrina, I guess it's Katrina Ward. I'm really looking forward to getting to this at some point. It probably would be a book that would fit perfectly for the spooky season. This next book I picked up at Books A Million in the bargain section, so I was really happy that I was able to find it because this author is a wonderful artist as well, and the book is Slewfoot by Brom. And again, it was another book I wanted to read in the spooky season, and I don't know if I've mentioned it already, but I read Needful Things during the spooky season, and that's another Stephen King chunker, and it took a lot of time for me to get through that one. So I wasn't able to fit this one in. However, I am reading this book at some point this year because I love the whole vibe I'm getting from just looking at the cover and the illustrations inside, and from what I understand, it is supposed to be a good time. Next up is a collection of novellas by Stephen King, If It Bleeds. And I originally wanted to read the story Mr. Harrigan's Phone because the movie was released around the time that we were having the spooky season. I guess it was sometime in October, maybe beginning of November perhaps. And I had that on my spooky season movie watching marathon and did not get to watch it because I did not get to read the story. So I want to go ahead and read that story as well as some other novellas in here, which are called The Life of Chuck, If It Bleeds, Rat, and then there's an author's note. Of course, I'll read that as well. And one of the stories has the character Holly Gibney from The Outsider. She's also in the Bill Hodges trilogy as well. Not all the stories in If It Bleeds has to do with horror. There's some crime fiction, thriller, and some supernatural elements. The last book in my horror category is The Woman in Black and Other Ghost Stories by Susan Hill. Now, I read The Woman in Black for my book club, I believe it was in March, and I wanted to get to the other stories that were in the collection because they are ghost stories, they have gothic vibes. I tried to put it on my list for October and could not get to the other stories. But the titles of the stories in this collection are Dolly, The Man in the Picture, Printer's Devil Court, and then The Small Hand. I'm kind of creeped out by anything called The Small Hand. I wonder if it has like weird Coraline vibes to it. I love The Woman in Black. I love both the story as well as the movie. If you haven't read anything by Susan Hill, I would highly recommend starting with The Woman in Black. Only 5 more books to go, woohoo! And that is the nonfiction books on my list that I want to get to that I did not get to in 2022. And the first one is called Choose Joy. These are 3-minute devotions for women. And I actually picked this book up at a Christian bookstore in Ponchatoula because I did a whole year of joy project on my Instagram in 2022. Well, guess what? It got buried and I just recently found it. And I was like, there's that little book. I forgot all about reading it. But I want to go ahead and still read it because it's little bite-sized passages, and who couldn't use joy every day? I mean, it's only 3 minutes. The next nonfiction book I have on my list is a memoir, and this is by Anne Bogle. It is called I'd Rather Be Reading, The Delights and Dilemmas of the Reading Life. And I think this is going to be delightful. I happened to gift this to myself. It was this and another little reading journal she had, as well as a stamp pad and a little stamper that has your name on it, showing that your books belong in your library. And I bought it from a bookstore that had this as a gift, so I went ahead and bought it for myself. But I had really wanted to read it and start 2022 with this, as well as my reading journal, and I didn't do either. So I'm going to go ahead and read the book. I'm probably not going to start the reading journal because January is almost over. The next 3 books on my list have to do with personal development, and the first one is also humorous and has some philosophy in it, and that is How to Be Perfect: The Correct Answer to Every Moral Question by Michael Schur. He is the creator of The Good Place, which is one of my favorite shows. He's also a co-creator of Parks and Rec, which is another one of my favorite shows. And he was a writer as well as the character Mose on The Office, which is also one of my favorite shows. So I think this would be a lot of fun. My friend Simon actually sent this to me last year for my birthday, and I never did get around to reading it, but I have been wanting to read it. It seems like it's going to be a lot of fun, and he is very funny. I've actually listened to him being interviewed on Gretchen Rubin's podcast and just love hearing his stories. Another book that has to do with personal development, also psychology and productivity, is The 5 a.m. Club. Now, this book was recommended to me by my oldest son, Barry Jr., and it has been sitting in my box since the beginning of 2022. So I really do need to get to this because I have been time tracking. I have been trying to figure out why I'm not as productive as I used to be when I was working at school as an instructional coach. I think part of it is it's because I've abandoned my morning routine. So between time tracking, doing my Tranquility by Tuesday project, and reading this book, I'm hoping that I can get back on track and be a little more productive with my days. And the last book on my list of 23 books to read in 2023 is another book that was gifted to me by my friend Simon for my birthday last year in 2022. And this is a book by Brené Brown, and it's called Atlas of the Heart: Mapping Meaningful Connection and the Language of Human Experience. And it has a lot to do with emotions. And I didn't really realize this, but there, according to this, she takes us on a journey through 87 of the emotions and experiences that define what it means to be human. So I have read Daring Greatly by Brené Brown and really enjoyed that book. So I was interested to see what she did with this one as well. Well, those are the 23 books that I plan to read in 2023 that I carried over from 2022. Thank you for stopping by and spending some time with me. I really do appreciate it. Let me know in the comments if any of the books that I've mentioned you have read or happen to be on your radar. In the meantime, stay amazing and be adventurous.